Daniel Carter stood at the observation window of the Unity and watched the stars pass by like slow rivers of light. He had been doing this for 12 years now. 12 years of serving the Galactic Coalition. 12 years of fighting for species that were not his own. 12 years of proving that humans were more than what the galaxy believed them to be. He was 41 years old. His brown hair had started turning gray at the temples. His hands were rough and from countless battles. His body carried the marks of every mission, every wound, every sacrifice. But his eyes were still sharp. His heart was still strong, and he still believed in what he was doing. The Coalition was a union of 17 different alien species spread across 300 star systems. They had formed this alliance 2 centuries ago to protect each other from threats too big for any single species to handle. Humans had joined only 30 years ago, and they were still considered newcomers. Primitives. A young species from a small blue planet that had barely learned to travel between stars. Most aliens looked at humans with a mix of curiosity and pity. They saw a species that lived short lives, felt too many emotions, and solved problems with their fists instead of their minds. Humans were useful for dangerous work. They were strong and stubborn and did not give up easily, but they were not respected. Not really. Daniel had spent his entire career trying to change that. He turned away from the window when he heard footsteps behind him. A young crew member with green skin and 4 arms nodded at him nervously before hurrying past. Daniel did not take it personally. Most of the crew avoided him. They were not cruel about it. They simply did not know what to say to him. He was the only human on the ship. The Unity was a medium-sized cruiser with a crew of 87. It handled rescue missions, patrol duties, and occasional combat operations in the outer territories. Daniel served as the primary combat specialist. When things got dangerous, when enemies attacked, when situations turned violent, Daniel was the one they sent in first. His armor made him famous. He called it the Ironclad. It was a heavily modified that he had rebuilt and improved over the years using parts from a dozen different worlds. The armor made him faster, stronger, and harder to kill. It had saved his life more times than he could count. It had also saved the lives of hundreds of others. Daniel walked through the corridors toward the briefing room. The ship hummed softly around him, the sound of engines and life support systems working together in harmony. He passed crew members who stepped aside to let him through. Some nodded. Most did not. He reached the briefing room and found Commander already waiting inside. She stood at the center table, studying a holographic display that showed a distant planet. Her silver-blue skin caught the light in a way that made her look almost metallic. Her violet eyes moved across the data with cold precision. Her people were known for their intelligence, their long lives, and their emotional control. They rarely showed what they felt. They considered open emotion to be a weakness, a sign of a primitive mind. Was 230 years old. She had been commanding ships since before Daniel's grandparents were born. She did not look up when he entered. Daniel stood at attention and waited. This was how things worked with. She acknowledged people when she was ready, not before. After a long moment she spoke. Her voice was calm and measured, like water flowing over smooth stones. We received a distress signal from Prime, a mining colony in the outer belt. 47 civilians are trapped underground after a pirate raid collapsed their primary tunnels. Daniel studied the display. Prime was a small moon covered in gray rock and thin atmosphere. The mining colony was built into a network of underground tunnels where workers extracted rare metals used in ship construction. It was a hard place to live. The people who worked there were tough. Pirates, Daniel said. Did they leave? Unknown. The attack happened 6 hours ago. Communication with the colony has been limited. We know there are survivors trapped below the collapse zone. We do not know if the pirates are still in the area. Daniel nodded slowly. Rescue operation then, with possible hostile contact. Yes, finally looked at him. Her violet eyes showed nothing. No warmth, no coldness, just careful evaluation. I am assembling a team. You will lead the ground extraction. Get the civilians out while we provide cover from orbit. Understood, Commander. She turned back to the display. The atmosphere on Prime is toxic to most species, can survive it for limited periods with breathing equipment. Humans cannot survive it at all without full environmental suits. The ironclad has a sealed system. I can operate in toxic atmosphere for up to 20 hours. Good, the collapse zone is deep. Structural integrity is failing. There is a high probability of further cave-ins during the rescue attempt. She paused. This mission has a significant chance of casualties. Daniel understood what she was saying. This mission was dangerous. People might die. He might die. I volunteer, he said simply. Studied him for a moment. Something flickered in her eyes, but it passed too quickly for Daniel to identify. Very well. Briefing for the full team in 1 hour. Prepare your equipment. Daniel turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. Carter. He looked back. The colonists are mostly families, children. They are frightened and injured and running out of air. Her voice remained flat, but there was something underneath it, something that might have been concern. Do not let them die. Daniel met her eyes. In that moment, despite the distance she always kept, he felt something pass between them. Understanding, trust, maybe even respect. I will bring them home, Commander. He left the briefing room and headed for the armory. His mind was already working through the mission parameters. Collapsed tunnels, toxic atmosphere, possible enemy contact, trapped civilians including children. It was exactly the kind of mission where humans proved their worth, not through elegant solutions or superior technology, through stubborn refusal to give up, through bleeding and suffering and pushing forward when every logical choice said to stop. Daniel reached the armory and began preparing the ironclad. He checked every system, every seal, every weapon. The armor was old and worn, patched together from years of hard service, but it was reliable. It would not fail him. He thought about the trapped colonists, 47 people waiting in the darkness, wondering if help would come, children crying for their parents, parents praying for rescue. He would not let them down. 3 hours later, the Unity dropped out of faster-than-light travel above Prime. The gray moon hung in space like a dead stone. Smoke rose from the surface where the pirate attack had left its marks. Daniel stood in the drop bay with his team. 6 soldiers from different species, all volunteers, all willing to risk their lives for strangers. He looked at each of them and nodded. Then the bay doors opened, and they fell toward the wounded moon below. The mission had begun. The surface of Prime was a wasteland of gray dust and broken rock. Smoke drifted across the landscape from fires that still burned in the ruins of the colony's surface buildings. The toxic atmosphere swirled around Daniel as he led his team toward the main entrance of the underground tunnels. His armor's sensors painted a grim picture, structural damage everywhere, radiation leaks from destroyed power systems, and deep below the surface, 47 life signs growing weaker by the hour. The pirates were gone. Scans showed no hostile ships in the area. They had taken what they wanted and left the colonists to die in the darkness. It was a common tactic in the outer territories. Strike fast, steal everything valuable, and disappear before help could arrive. Daniel pushed forward through the ruined entrance. The tunnel walls were cracked and unstable. Debris covered the floor. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting strange shadows that moved like living things. Team, spread out and check for survivors in the upper levels, Daniel ordered through his communicator. I am going deeper. The main group is trapped near the mining shaft at level 7. The other soldiers acknowledged and began their search. Daniel moved alone into the darkness. The deeper he went, the worse the damage became. Entire sections of tunnel had collapsed. Support beams bent at wrong angles. The air was thick with dust that would have choked any unprotected being. His armor systems worked hard to keep him alive. Air filters cleaned the toxic atmosphere. Cooling systems fought against the heat rising from damaged power conduits. Strength enhancers helped him push through obstacles that would have stopped a normal human. After 2 hours of climbing over rubble and crawling through tight spaces, Daniel reached level 7. The collapse had created a wall of broken stone and twisted metal that completely blocked the main tunnel. Behind that wall, his sensors showed 32 life signs clustered together. He could hear them, faint sounds of crying, voices calling out children asking for help. Daniel placed his hands against the debris wall and began to dig. The work was brutal. Each piece of rubble weighed hundreds of pounds. His armor's servos whined with effort as he lifted chunks of broken ceiling and threw them aside. Progress was measured in inches. Sweat poured down his face inside his helmet. His muscles burned with exhaustion. 3 hours in, a support beam shifted without warning. Daniel barely had time to raise his arms before tons of rock came crashing down on him. The impact drove him to his knees. Red warnings flashed across his display. Structural damage to his left arm assembly. Mobility reduced by 30%. He stood up and kept digging. The voices on the other side grew louder as the wall between them grew thinner. They could hear him now. They knew someone was coming. A child's voice called out in broken common, the shared language of the coalition. "Please, please hurry. My mother is not waking up." Daniel dug faster. His right hand finally broke through. A small hole opened into the space beyond. Dim light spilled through and he saw faces looking back at him. Faces, silver blue and covered in dust. Eyes wide with fear and desperate hope. "I am here," Daniel said. His voice came out rough and tired. "I am going to get you out, all of you, just hold on." He widened the hole until it was large enough for a person to crawl through. Then he squeezed inside and found himself in a large chamber that had once been a storage room. 32 colonists huddled together against the far wall. Most were sitting or lying down. Many were injured. A few were not moving at all. A young female approached him. She was perhaps 30 years old by their standards, which meant she was barely an adult. Her arm hung at a wrong angle, clearly broken. "More a trap below," she said. "The lower mining shaft, 15 more, including children." Daniel nodded. "I will get them, but first I need to start moving your group to the surface. Can any of you walk?" 12 could walk on their own. 8 needed help. 12 could not move at all. Daniel began carrying them out one by one. Each trip took nearly an hour, through the narrow hole, through the collapsed tunnels, up through the darkness toward the surface where his team waited to receive the wounded. He carried adults across his shoulders. He cradled children against his chest. He went back again and again until his body screamed for rest. His armor took more damage with each trip. A ceiling collapse cracked 3 of his ribs. A falling beam dislocated his shoulder. Internal sensors detected bleeding inside his chest that he did not have time to worry about. After the 12th trip, one of his team members grabbed his arm. "Carter, you need medical attention. Let someone else take over." Daniel shook his head. 15 more in the lower shaft. No one else's equipment can handle that depth. I am going. He went back into the tunnels. The lower mining shaft was worse than anything above. The collapse had been total. Daniel had to cut through solid rock in some places, using his armor's integrated tools until the power cells ran dangerously low. The toxic atmosphere grew thicker. His air filters struggled to keep up. He found them in a small pocket of space near the bottom of the shaft. 15 colonists, 8 adults and 7 children. They had been down here for almost 18 hours with no food, limited water and air that was slowly turning poisonous. An elderly male lay motionless at the edge of the group. Daniel checked him and found no heartbeat. He had died less than an hour ago, just before Daniel arrived. The others were alive but weak. Daniel did not have time to grieve for the one he could not save. He had to focus on the 14 he still could. He carried them out, all of them, one at a time, trip after trip through broken rock and burning air. His armor failed piece by piece. First, the left arm assembly locked up completely. Then the cooling system went offline. Then the strength enhancers stuttered and died. For the last 3 trips, Daniel carried survivors on pure human muscle. No technological help. Just a broken body pushing forward because giving up was not an option. When he finally brought the last child to the surface, he could barely stand. His armor was ruined. His body was destroyed. Blood dripped from his nose and ears. Every breath sent fire through his cracked ribs. But 46 people were alive because of him. Coalition medics rushed to help the survivors. Shuttles arrived to transport the wounded to the Unity. Families reunited in tearful embraces. Parents held children they had feared they would never see again. Daniel stood at the edge of the landing zone and watched. He waved off the medics who tried to examine him. He could wait. These people needed help more than he did. For a moment, despite all the pain, he felt peace. This was why he did what he did. This was why the suffering was worth it. 46 lives saved. Families made whole again. Then he saw Commander walking toward him across the gray dust. Her face was unreadable. Her violet eyes were fixed on him with an expression he could not identify. She stopped several feet away and looked at him in silence. Daniel expected gratitude. He expected acknowledgement. He expected something. What he got was nothing like that at all. Commander stood before Daniel with her arms crossed over her chest. The gray dust of primes swirled around them both. Behind her, the rescued colonists were being loaded onto shuttles. Medics ran back and forth treating injuries. Children cried in their parents' arms. Daniel waited for her to speak. His body ached with exhaustion. His broken ribs made every breath painful. Blood had dried on his face from the injuries he had ignored during the rescue. He was tired in a way that went beyond physical limits. But he stood straight. He met her eyes. He waited for the words he had earned. His violet eyes were cold, not just distant like usual, cold like ice, cold like the space between stars. "You endangered this entire operation," she said. Daniel blinked. He was not sure he had heard her correctly. "Commander, your reckless behavior put everyone at risk. You ignored protocol. You disobeyed direct orders. You operated alone in conditions that should have required team coordination." Her voice was flat and hard. "You are lucky anyone survived at all." Daniel felt confusion rising in his chest. "I saved 46 people. The rescue was successful." "The rescue was chaos. You made decisions without consulting command. You pushed beyond safe operational limits. You damaged coalition equipment beyond repair." She gestured at his ruined armor. "The ironclad will need to be completely rebuilt. The cost will come from the mission budget." "I was saving lives. Children were dying down there." "Children die every day across the galaxy. That does not give you permission to act like a wild animal." His words cut through the air like knives. "This is exactly what I expected from a human. Brute force, emotional reaction, no thought for consequences." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was not criticism. This was contempt. "I followed my training. I assessed the situation and made the best choices I could under extreme conditions." "You followed your instincts like the primitive creature you are." Took a step closer. Her face showed no anger, no frustration, just cold certainty. "Humans think that suffering makes them noble, that bleeding and breaking yourselves proves your worth. It does not. It proves that you lack the intelligence to find better solutions." Daniel stood in silence. He did not know how to respond. 12 years of service, hundreds of missions, countless lives saved, and this was how she saw him. "The coalition tolerates your species because you are useful," continued. "You are strong, you are stubborn, you do not give up even when you should. These qualities make you effective tools for dangerous work." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. Tools, nothing more. Daniel felt the word hit him like a physical blow. Tool, not soldier, not comrade, not even person, just a tool. "I have served this coalition for 12 years, he said quietly. "I have bled for every species in the Alliance. I have stood between your people and death more times than I can count. And you have been compensated for your service. You receive pay, you receive housing, you receive medical care." His voice remained perfectly calm. "A tool does not deserve gratitude for performing its function. A hammer does not receive praise for driving nails." Daniel looked at her and saw nothing. No recognition of what he had done. No acknowledgement of his sacrifice. Just a superior officer looking at equipment that had performed adequately. "What about the colonists?" he asked. "The people I saved, do they see me the same way?" Glanced over her shoulder at the rescued being loaded onto shuttles. None of them were looking at Daniel. None of them had approached him to say thank you. They moved past him like he was part of the scenery, just another piece of equipment. "They see you exactly as they should," said, "as a useful tool that performed its function. They are grateful to the coalition for sending help. They are grateful to their own people for organizing the rescue. They do not think about the human who carried them through the darkness. Why would they?" Daniel felt something breaking inside him, something that had held him together through all the years of service, all the pain, all the loneliness of being the only human surrounded by species that never truly accepted him. He had believed that his actions mattered, that saving lives earned him respect, that proving himself again and again would eventually make them see him as an equal. He had been wrong. "You should report to medical," said. "Your injuries require treatment. Once you are stable, submit a full report on the mission for review. Include all deviations from protocol." She turned and walked away without another word. Daniel stood alone on the gray surface of Prime. Around him, the rescue operation continued. Shuttles lifted off toward the Unity. Medics finished treating the last of the wounded. His team members gathered their equipment and prepared to leave. None of them looked at him either. He watched the families boarding the shuttles, parents holding children, husbands supporting wives, old ones leaning on young ones. 46 people alive because he had refused to give up. 46 people who would go home to their lives and never think about the human who bled for them. A young girl, perhaps 7 years old, walked past him holding her mother's hand. Daniel had carried her out of the lower mining shaft. She had cried against his chest and called him her hero. Now she did not even glance in his direction. Her mother pulled her along faster, putting distance between them and the human standing in the dust. Daniel felt the last piece of something precious shatter inside him. He had given everything he had, his strength, his blood, his body, his belief in something greater than himself. He had carried their wounded on his shoulders. He had breathed their toxic air. He had broken his bones to save their children. And they looked at him like he was nothing. Not a hero, not even a person, just a tool, an expendable piece of equipment that had served its purpose. The medics finally approached him. They were green-skinned and efficient. They scanned his injuries and made concerned noises about his internal bleeding. They guided him toward a shuttle with professional care. Daniel let them lead him. He did not have the strength to resist. He did not have the will to argue. He looked up at the gray sky of Prime one last time. Somewhere beyond those clouds, the stars waited. The same stars he had served under for 12 years. The same stars he had believed in. They seemed very far away now. He boarded the shuttle and did not look back at the colony he had saved. There was nothing left to see, nothing left to feel. Commander's words echoed in his mind. A tool does not deserve gratitude for performing its function. Maybe she was right. Maybe that was all he had ever been. Maybe everything he believed about himself, about his purpose, about his worth, had been a lie he told himself to make the suffering bearable. The shuttle lifted off and carried him back to the Unity. Daniel sat in silence and felt the emptiness growing inside him like a wound that would never heal. The medical bay of the Unity was quiet and clean. Daniel lay on a treatment bed while machines scanned his broken body and began the slow process of repair. 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder that had been roughly reset during the mission, internal bleeding that required immediate intervention, dozens of smaller injuries that would take weeks to fully heal. The doctor worked in silence. He did not speak to Daniel beyond what was necessary. He did not ask how the mission went. He did not comment on the severity of the injuries or the obvious signs of extreme overexertion. Daniel stared at the ceiling and felt nothing. The treatment took 4 hours. When it was done, the doctor told him to rest for at least 3 days before resuming any physical activity. Daniel nodded and left the medical bay without a word. He walked through the corridors of the ship, the same corridors he had walked for years, the same walls, the same lights, the same crew members who stepped aside to let him pass without meeting his eyes. Everything looked different now, not physically different. The ship had not changed, but Daniel saw it clearly for the first time. He saw the distance in every face, the careful avoidance, the subtle tension that appeared whenever he entered a room. They did not hate him. That would have required them to feel something about him at all. They simply did not think of him as one of them. He was the human, the tool, the useful equipment that lived in a room on Deck 4 and came out when there was dangerous work to be done. Daniel reached his quarters and stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft sound. The room was small and simple: a bed, a desk, a storage locker, a small window that looked out at the stars. He had lived here for 12 years and had never bothered to decorate. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal items on the desk, nothing that marked this space as belonging to a specific person. Because it did not belong to a person, it belonged to a tool. The ironclad stood in the corner of the room. His armor, his identity, the thing that had made him something more than just another weak human in a galaxy full of stronger species. It was ruined. The left arm assembly hung loose and broken. The chest plate was cracked in 3 places. Scorch marks and dents covered every surface. The helmet's visor was scratched so badly that the display barely functioned. Daniel walked to the armor and stood before it in silence. This suit had saved his life more times than he could count. It had allowed him to go places no human could survive. It had made him strong enough to carry adults through collapsed tunnels, fast enough to dodge plasma fire, tough enough to keep going when his body wanted to quit. He had rebuilt it 100 times, improved it with technology from a dozen different worlds, poured his heart and soul into making it the best it could be. And it was just equipment, just tools using tools. Daniel began removing the pieces. He started with the gauntlets, heavy gloves of metal and circuits that had pulled children from rubble. He unclipped them carefully and set them down on the floor. Next came the arm assemblies, sleeves of armor that had held collapsing ceilings while civilians crawled to safety. He laid them beside the gauntlets. The chest plate was harder to remove. Damaged clips and bent connectors made the process slow and painful, but eventually it came free. Daniel held it in his hands for a moment, looking at the scars it had collected over the years. Each mark was a story, a mission, a life saved. He set it down with the rest. The leg assemblies, the boot covers, the power pack, the helmet. Piece by piece, Daniel stripped away the armor that had defined him. Each component joined the others on the floor until there was nothing left. He stood in his basic uniform and looked at the pile of metal and technology at his feet. Without it, he was just a man, 41 years old, tired, alone. Daniel sat down at his desk and activated the communication terminal. He stared at the blank screen for a long moment before he began to type. The message was addressed to Coalition Command. It was short and professional. I hereby resign my position as combat specialist aboard the Unity effective immediately. 12 years of service concluded. No reason given. No request for reassignment. Just an ending. He sent the message and sat back in his chair. Within an hour, he received confirmation that his resignation had been accepted. No questions asked. No attempt to convince him to stay. No acknowledgement of his years of service. Commander did not respond at all. If she even saw his resignation notice, she did not bother to comment. Why would she? Tools did not require farewell messages. Daniel packed his belongings. It did not take long. A few sets of civilian clothes, a handful of personal items, some money he had saved over the years. Everything fit into a single small bag. He left the ironclad where it lay on the floor, let them dispose of it, rebuild it for someone else, melt it down for parts. He did not care anymore. The next supply shuttle was leaving for Earth in 6 hours. Daniel booked passage and spent the remaining time sitting in his quarters, not sleeping, not thinking, just waiting. When the time came, he walked to the shuttle bay with his bag over his shoulder. A few crew members noticed him passing. None of them asked where he was going. None of them said goodbye. Daniel boarded the shuttle and found a seat near the back. Through the small window, he could see the Unity hanging in space. The ship that had been his home for over a decade. The place where he had believed he was building something meaningful. The shuttle detached and began moving away from the cruiser. Daniel watched the Unity grow smaller and smaller until it was just another light among the stars. He thought he should feel something. Sadness maybe, or anger, or regret. He felt nothing at all. The shuttle jumped to faster-than-light travel, and the stars stretched into lines of light. They were heading to a transit station where Daniel would transfer to another ship bound for Earth. The journey would take several days. He had plenty of time to think about what came next, but he did not want to think. He did not want to plan. He just wanted to go somewhere far away from the stars and the Coalition and the people who saw him as nothing more than a useful piece of equipment. Earth was a small planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy. Humans still lived there in large numbers. Simple lives on a simple world. Daniel had not been back in 15 years. Maybe there he could find something. Maybe there he could be more than a tool, or maybe he would discover that was right. Maybe he was nothing special after all. The shuttle flew on through the darkness between stars. Daniel closed his eyes and let the emptiness carry him home. 3 years passed like slow water flowing over stones. Daniel Carter lived on a small farm in Montana, far from cities and even farther from the stars. He had bought the property with his savings shortly after returning to Earth, 20 acres of land, an old farmhouse that needed constant repair, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, fields that had not been properly worked in decades. He learned to grow vegetables. He fixed fences and patched roofs. He woke with the sun and went to sleep when darkness fell. His hands grew calloused from work that had nothing to do with weapons or armor. His body healed slowly from the years of damage he had done to it. He did not watch the news from the stars. He did not follow Coalition broadcasts. He did not contact anyone from his old life. When neighbors asked about his past, he said he used to work in security. They did not ask for details. The nights were the hardest. Montana had clear skies, and the stars were visible in ways they never were in cities. Daniel would sometimes stand on his porch and look up at the endless darkness spotted with distant lights. Somewhere out there, the Unity was flying missions. Somewhere out there, aliens were living lives that he had once been part of. He tried not to think about it. Most nights he succeeded. On the evening that changed everything, Daniel was in his barn repairing an old tractor. It was simple work, mechanical, honest, the kind of work that asked nothing of him except attention and effort. He heard the sound before he saw anything, a low humming that did not belong to any earth machine. Then a wash of light passed over the barn as something descended from the sky. Daniel stepped outside and saw a small shuttle landing in his field. It was clearly alien design, coalition technology. His heart began beating faster despite his efforts to remain calm. The shuttle settled onto the grass and its engines powered down. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the hatch opened and a figure stepped out into the evening light. She was young by their standards, silver-blue skin that caught the last rays of the setting sun. She wore simple civilian clothes and moved with nervous uncertainty. In her hands, she carried something wrapped in cloth. Daniel stood by his barn and watched her approach. He did not speak, he did not move, he just waited. The young stopped a few feet away from him. Her violet eyes studied his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Are you Daniel Carter?" she asked. Her voice was soft and hesitant. "Yes." "My name is—" She took a breath that seemed to steady her. "You probably do not remember me. I was 7 years old, on Prime, in the lower mining shaft." Daniel felt something stir in the hollow space where his heart used to live. He remembered. A small girl crying in the darkness, arms wrapped around his neck as he carried her through the toxic tunnels, a voice calling him her hero. "I remember," he said quietly. His eyes filled with tears that caught the fading light. "I have been searching for you for 3 years. When you left the coalition, no one would tell me where you went. I had to hire investigators, track transit records, follow a trail that went cold a dozen times." "Why?" The question seemed to confuse her. "Because you saved my life. You saved all of our lives, and then you just disappeared." Daniel felt old pain rising in his chest. "I did my job. I was a tool that performed its function. Tools do not deserve thanks." Flinched like he had struck her. "Is that what they told you? Is that why you left?" Commander explained things very clearly. "Was wrong." His voice grew stronger. Anger flashed in her violet eyes. "She was cruel and wrong, and we were all cowards for not speaking up sooner." She stepped closer and held out the wrapped bundle. "This is for you, from the colonists of Prime, from the 45 families who are whole because of what you did." Daniel took the bundle with uncertain hands. He unwrapped the cloth slowly and found something that made his breath catch in his throat. It was a medal, but not like any coalition medal he had ever seen. This was handcrafted from crystal, shaped into a complex pattern that caught light and refracted it into tiny rainbows. At its center was a symbol he recognized, the mark of highest honor, given only to those who had performed acts of extraordinary courage and sacrifice. "This honor is reserved for heroes," Daniel said. "It cannot be given to outsiders." The colonists petitioned the council for 3 years to change that rule, wiped tears from her face. "We told them what you did, how you carried us through the darkness when you were breaking apart inside your armor, how you refused to stop even when your body was destroyed, how you saved our children one at a time because you would not leave anyone behind." Daniel stared at the medal. Light danced across its surface like captured starlight. "We know what's said to you," continued. "Word reached the colony a few months after you left. The colonists were ashamed. We should have spoken to you that day. We should have thanked you. We should have stood between you and her cruelty." Her voice broke. "We were afraid. We did not know how to talk to a human. We let our silence hurt you, and we are sorry." "What happened to?" Daniel asked. "Removed from command. The council investigated her treatment of human personnel after your resignation became public. They found patterns of discrimination and cruelty going back decades." Met his eyes. "Your leaving forced them to see what they had ignored for too long. Humans are no longer treated as expendable tools. Because of you." Daniel looked at the medal in his hands, then at the young woman who had crossed the galaxy to find him. I did not leave to make a statement. I left because I was broken. I know, reached out and touched his arm gently. But broken things can heal, and sometimes breaking is what forces the universe to change. Daniel felt something shifting inside him, something that had been frozen for 3 years beginning to thaw. It hurt, but it was a good hurt, the kind of hurt that meant he was still alive. You are not a tool, Daniel Carter. His voice was firm and certain. You are the reason I grew up, the reason I got to have birthdays and holidays and a future, the reason 45 other families have the same thing. She squeezed his arm. You mattered, you matter. Please do not forget that again. Daniel looked at the medal, then at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. For 3 years, those stars had seemed cold and distant, reminders of rejection and pain. But now, in the fatting light of a Montana evening, they looked different. They looked like home. Would you like to come inside? Daniel asked. I have tea. It is not very good, but it is warm. Smiled. It was the first time he had seen a smile with genuine warmth. I would like that very much. They walked together toward the old farmhouse. Behind them, the stars continued to appear one by one, filling the sky with light. And Daniel Carter, for the first time in 3 years, looked up at them without looking away. The universe had not forgotten him after all.